Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, the wise guy. Today is February 4th, 2025. The weekend was a flurry of news to include trade wars that I'm not entirely sure that we've left. What I do know for certain is this little game that's all too familiar, and Trump supporters just keep taking the bait time after time after time. Clearly, if nobody points out to them in color the game that is being played by this grifter wannabe mafia boss, we will continue to be dragged through the sewer of modern conservatism. So if you dig news, history, or just humorous American hogwash, make sure to drop a blue heart in those comments for me. From tariffs on Mexico to tariffs on Canada, unless and until they, quote, become the 51st state. So stupid. The past few days have been nonsensical and expensive pissing contests. Within hours of these declarations, he claimed that the leaders had come to an agreement and made it appear as though there were some kind of rock-solid policies that he had forced into play due to his ability to navigate through tough, cutthroat negotiating skills. Because they were so willing to acquiesce to his demands, the Great Blumpkin placed a 30-day hold on the tariffs for both countries to work out the new and complicated details of these policies, and Trump took a victory lap. His supporters unapologetically refused to look any further into it beyond what their cult leader had told them, and they went out cheering for him as if he hadn't started the whole fiasco to begin with. And damn it, wouldn't you know it, taking Donald Trump at his word turned out to be a mistake. So let's look at all the neat things Commander Covfefe has graced upon we, the American proletariat. Shall we? Mexico agreed to do what they were already going to do under Biden by sending troops to the border. And Canada is agreeing to do what they had already set to do 6 weeks ago on their own volition. In turn, Trump lifted the tariffs and got nothing out of the deal except avoiding having to face the consequences of his own actions. We can speculate all day as to the reasoning, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is a career pattern with this man. The only truly successful thing Trump has ever done in his life is branding himself to be far more successful than he actually is. He takes work that had already been done by other people and then he slaps his name on it. He's basically John Hammond from Jurassic Park if John Hammond was more akin to his novel character than his movie character. And much more stupid. One of the primary pats on the back that the conservatives like to give themselves are claims that Trump had done a lot for us during his first term. Often cited by those who can actually make attempts at recalling information are policies like the USMCA. This is a trade policy that had been implemented because, like he is now, Trump pulled us out of the trade agreements we had already had to begin with our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. Not long after came what appeared to be the very agreement that he got rid of with just a few minor updates to include increasing wages for automotive workers, improving workforce regulations, and updating intellectual and e-commerce regulations that hadn't been there before. While his supporters all hail this as a massive success, it wasn't anything that couldn't have been an updated policy on an already existing agreement. But hang tight, because this gets pretty stupid later on. In a nutshell, Trump wanted to put his name on something so he didn't leave an office with a legacy built primarily on just loud, obnoxious buffoonery. But then in his second term, after taking all of the credit in the world for having negotiated this new deal, Trump then imposes tariffs on both of those countries because he says they're ripping us off, which, to be fair, is a complete misunderstanding of what and how trade deficits work. We have a lot more people, and per capita, our people consume the most. Trade deficits with smaller productive countries are literally inevitable in how this whole thing works. We are larger, thus we import more than Canada does. That's a trade deficit. It's normal no matter how bad it may sound. It's just terminology. Let me make this a bit easier to digest. Elephants eat a lot more food than beavers. You can't force a beaver to consume as much as an elephant no matter how hard you try. Threatening to ignore the beaver entirely if it doesn't comply won't make it any hungrier. I hope that helps. Then there was this little fiasco with immigrants being turned away in Colombia because they were in shackles. Before I get the comments about illegal immigrants breaking laws and therefore they're criminals, let's clear something up. Most people who are here illegally overstayed their visa, and that isn't a crime. It's a civil offense, which is an administrative infraction. Although it has much greater consequences on a person's life, it isn't criminal to overstay a visa. Using this terminology confuses the situation and attempts to characterize everyday American workers and members of our communities as dangerous and people we need to fear instead of defend. It's not a new strategy, as Trump has also referred to these populations as poisoning the blood of our country and his political opponents as vermin. Keep in mind, we already had a fairly robust deportation system open with Colombia. But under different administrations, we had just been treating these immigrants with the dignity that they deserved while they were being returned to their home country. Something that the Donald Trump administration is purposely going out of its way not to do. But a sincerely interesting point that I also want to cover with this immigration issue is the twisted premise that I've seen in my more conservative circles. One of which being that Democrats are acting like the racists that they were in the 1800s when it came to slaves and labor. And wow, that's a hell of an accusation because it is a combination of fallacies all in one. And it's just impressive. This is a false equivalence, a historical red herring, and guilt by association. So let me break it down. The false equivalency fails because slavery was forced, unpaid labor with no legal rights, while modern immigrant labor, even undocumented labor, involves wages, legal protections, and voluntary employment, even if exploitation occurs. While some employers exploit immigration labor, this is not the same as chattel slavery, where people were legally owned as property. It's a historical red herring because the argument distracts from present-day policies by shifting the focus to the Democratic Party's history in the 1800s, ignoring the massive ideological shift that took place in the 20th century, when Democrats became the party of civil rights and labor protections. It also ignores Republican-led policies that have encouraged cheap labor, such as corporate deregulation and blocking immigration reform that could provide legal protection for workers. And the guilt by association between the Democratic Party and slavery of the 1800s is nothing new, and in fact comes off as really low effort. It implies that because Democrats in the 1800s supported slavery, modern Democrats must also support an equivalent system of exploitation. This ignores the fact that modern political parties have changed dramatically in ideology, especially after the civil rights movement and the Southern strategy shifted party alignments. Anyone who even tries to use these tactics are not trying to learn anything new, but deflect your points to enrich themselves further. This argument is bad faith distortion of history that relies on misleading comparisons. While labor exploitation exists across political lines, equating modern employment, even exploitative versions of it, with 19th century slavery is intellectually dishonest, and it ignores policy differences between the parties. The only folks that are actively trying to exploit undocumented workers are most certainly the modern Republican Party as they're colloquially understood today. During his first term, Trump also took what was called the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, and he rebranded it through executive power to what he then called Schedule F, which reclassified certain federal positions to facilitate hiring and firing. But then in his second term, he did it again by rebranding the rebrand of Schedule F to an initiative he calls Schedule Career/Policy, wherein the core objectives never changed. And this is what he does. He doesn't come up with anything new. He simply takes what's already existed and repackages it as his own, and his supporters just take it all in without looking into it. And now, as he's being openly laughed at by governments around the world and his opposition party within his own country for having been outmaneuvered at every turn, his supporters are getting this idea that somehow he's coming out on top because these deals, all because he decided against the original plans of diving headlong into economic catastrophe. We got nothing new except the stock market, who is super sketch about this administration, and the one primary quality hanging over investors is a climate of volatility. Even if Trump chooses to cancel his tariffs in the 30 days and doesn't try to kick those cans down the road to maintain some kind of media frenzy, which is legitimately all I think he's trying to do, he's not providing any confidence that's actually needed for a healthy stock market. What is good for the goose stepper isn't good for the gander, if you catch my drift. Your retirements are all hanging by a thread, and your grocery prices are only going up. So, thanks for hanging in there with me this long. If you dig the content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I'll do my best to bring y'all what I can from where I am. You all come back now. You hear?